Welcome to the Grow Fast podcast, where we talk with leading sales, marketing, and personal growth experts about how companies can accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow their businesses fast. Let's go. Hey, Scott. How are you?
Hey, Mark. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Hey, I looked at your LinkedIn profile. It says you're based in Austin.
I am.
I mean, that's supposed to be like the cool place to be these days. I mean, how long have you been there, and is it that cool?
Well, I think so. I have been here for 20 years. So
wow.
I didn't see it as big as it was, but I saw its potential. We cashed out of Orange County, California in the early 2000s and came out here. And I'm pretty sure I'm watching the city double in size for the third time.
Wow.
I mean, the skyline is completely different. It's a totally different space, but at the same time, I think it's managed to maintain a lot of the vibe. So it's working.
Well, I've heard that saying, "Keep Austin weird." Where does that come from?
So the actual origin story of that, it was like a Chamber of Commerce campaign, and it was it was all about like supporting local small business. And so people, if you didn't know that beginning, you would take it in all sorts of different ways. But, and in a lot of ways, it was kind of staying away from the big retail chains and the big brands and things like that. And then here we are, we've got Tesla's headquarters and Oracle's headquarters, and, Google has a huge presence and Apple has a huge presence. So, I don't know that they managed to maintain that, but I do think, again, kind of that feeling is still there in some ways.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of Joe Rogan's both podcast and stand-up comedy, and I know what he's done there with his comedy club is pretty amazing as well, because it's really helping to develop and provide a venue for up-and-coming talent as well. So that's pretty cool. It's funny. I was born and raised in Seattle. Seattle used to be very much a blue-collar town. It was all about Boeing. Everything, up or down. It was all depending on how Boeing was doing at that time, and that changed with Microsoft, and then it accelerated with Amazon and Costco and blah, 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 many other companies, and all the different startups that they created. In parallel with that, though, in the early to mid 90s, Seattle was the cool place to be, because we had the grunge movement. We had all this, the economy was transitioning. And along the way, though, I can say, and for good or bad, Seattle did lose a bit of its original kind of, fisherman, lumberjack, kind of blue collar, people working at Boeing kind of flavor. And, now it's a much more international place, much more, the economy is much more diversified. But you kind of, you gain something, you lose something. And I don't know if Austin, if you see some of that, you kind of alluded to that a bit, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess thank goodness Seattle isn't totally based on Boeing. That wouldn't be so good right now,
especially these last 5 years. Oh my gosh!
Yeah, kind of a rough stretch. But it's been really interesting to watch Austin become like it's a very connected space, right? It's very relational and friendly and all of those things. And I think that's why you've seen Rogan come here. Tim Ferriss came here, so you've got kind of this podcast center of the universe. You've got now this comedy center of the universe, certainly a tech center. So it's really cool to see all of those different dynamics. And that's what attracted me, right? I sort of saw, okay, it's the state capital. So you have all this very large state government infrastructure. You have the University of Texas. You have a massive school and college town kind of a feel. There's a lot of kind of technology and entrepreneurship. And so I think what makes it cool is it's the blend of all of those things that really works, right? It's not just one thing. It's not just a college town. It's not just a tech town. It's not just a state capital.
Well, it sounds pretty awesome. And one of my sons is a big F1 fan, and so he was down there for the F1.
And
he's like, "Oh my God, I got to go back every year." Great. Well, hey, Scott, I mean, you have a tremendous amount of experience, both as a frontline contributor, selling. I think you're still carrying your a quota carrying out there. You also have developed Sales Success Media, which includes a couple of podcasts, books, and a sales summit every year. And I want to talk to you about some of the lessons learned that you've gleaned from talking to hundreds of top performers across the country. And also want to talk to you about some of your ideas around identifying, hiring, and developing sales talent. But before we do that, could you maybe take 60 seconds and, just explain what Sales Success Media is? And because there's a couple key themes that run through everything that you do, but I want to hear it from you.
Yeah, so this all started for me about 8 years ago when I launched the Sales Success Stories podcast. And on that show, I only interview number one and top 1% active quota carrying individual contributors. And I did that because I've always been a student of sales, and I looked at the sales content that I was consuming and I went, this is insane. All of this is coming from people who haven't carried a quota themselves in, on average, I don't know, probably decades. And I wanted to know, of those who are performing at the highest levels right now, what are they doing? And what's cool is over the years, I've been able to talk to people who are performing at the highest levels in the middle of a global pandemic, in the middle of a recession, in the middle of emergence of all of these different communication channels and distractions, and now AI. So it's been a really, really incredible adventure. And then I started the opposite show in daily sales tips, because the two best things about sales success stories are the two worst things. My criteria is absolutely ridiculous, so I don't get to talk to people like you, Mark. And it's long. My favorite compliment is I'm the Tim Ferriss of sales, right? So the average interview is north of 75 minutes. So daily sales tips. Anybody that's got anything relevant to share with B2B sales professionals, and we do it every day, and it's less than 5 minutes per episode. So literally the opposite. And then we do this big event every year where the only people I put on stage are the people who've been on the Sales Success Stories podcast. So it really is an event for salespeople by sales professionals, and it's we're into I think coming up on our 7th year of that event. It's absolutely incredible.
I love it. And, you mentioned Tim Ferriss. One of my favorite books is Tools of the Titans, and which, he has a similar approach. He talks to top performers, not just in sales, but across all different industries and, areas of our world, I guess. And he takes, the best lessons learned from them and compiles that down and distills it into a book. So similar approach, but very much focused on sales. Let me ask you, because I think that there are some principles that are kind of timeless, like, building rapport and how you develop rapport with somebody, developing trust. Those things are kind of timeless, and they're always going to be important for selling. But, you mentioned things like selling through a global pandemic. The way we sell, when I first started selling, it was always about get the meeting. And then we started having, emails, and then it's social media, and then you reach out there and you can't spam people with emails anymore. And even on social media, it's getting really difficult. And then you have the pandemic come and say, how are you going to get a meeting when you're not even allowed to go out of your house, right? So now we have AI. In your view, what are the one or two biggest changes that you've seen over the last 10 to 15 years in terms of how we sell?
Yeah, I think, having sold that entire period, right, having kind of been through all of it, I think the biggest change right now, and I think the biggest change to come, where we're starting to see the impacts, is there's going to be lots of impact from AI. But I think what's changed the most since the early days of my career, and like you, like I had a local territory. I wasn't exactly knocking on doors, but pretty close, right? I think it's the proliferation of channels. Right. When I started selling, we had the phone, we had email. You had what?
There was a time when you had faxes too.
I was just going to say, you had fax. I am that old. And I'm that experienced, excuse me.
Yes.
and
seasoned.
And you had face to face. That's really all there was. So, and going through the emergence of social media and all of the additional capabilities. Again, think about the first phones that we used when we sold on, or if you're this experienced where you had to pull over and put quarters in a payphone to make calls. The world has changed so dramatically from that perspective. And I think what's been really difficult the last, whatever that's been, 10 or 15 years, is how do you break through the noise? There's so many distractions, and we as sales professionals are being bombarded by all of these things. So we're being distracted at the same level that our prospects are, and how anybody is paying any attention, I have no idea.
No, it's interesting. I was a big cold caller. I don't, or even just to follow up, you could send messages, you try different ways, but I'd always pick up the phone and call somebody. And I felt very confident that if I could get somebody on the phone, I could have a meaningful conversation, which means that they would either say yes, no, or maybe, but I would have some kind of action from there, and I felt that if I can get them on the phone, and if there's any kind of interest there at all, I can probably get the meeting. But these days, especially with the younger generation, calling people can be considered kind of aggressive because it's all about texting and things like that. And I'm wondering if you have if you have any stories related to that or any workarounds.
Yeah, I think the core theme is just the adaptability, right? And so it's understanding what are each of those channels, not challenges, but they go together. What are those channels? How do they work? Which ones are relevant and used by my prospects and those that I'm selling to, right? So those of us that live in a B2B world tend to kind of live on LinkedIn. And so understanding how do you make LinkedIn work for you, for example, right? And for me and many others, I think LinkedIn is by far and away the most called out tool of top performers. It's probably the most called out tool of any type of sales professional. Again, that's more in the B2B space. I think it's mostly about it's the research and the way that you can use it for personalization and the ability for you to find a path to that person that's maybe not so cold. Right. So if I can find a mutual connection, somebody that I know well and that you know well, that is an incredible opportunity. Right. And we didn't have that 20 years ago. You didn't have that in your Rolodex to know, well, I've got this random person that I'm calling. If only I knew that Mark went to college with them. Right. That would have completely changed the game because Mark could then just introduce me. So I think you have those things, even though we've all had email for a long time. I think it's how do you get creative with each of these platforms, and how do you do little things to stand out? Right. For years, one of our sponsors for a long time was Vidyard, and being able to send video messages is such a huge differentiator, right? And an ability to make a more human connection and show. The thing I always look at is how can I tell within a couple of seconds that you've actually done the work to kind of know who I am? Like, have you done your research? The thing that drives me crazy is I get podcasts, like I'm sure you do. I get podcast pitches at probably a half a dozen a day. If they had spent 2 minutes listening to my show, they would know they shouldn't even be reaching out to me in the first place. So it's those little things, just taking that. The beauty, though, is I think regardless of the channel, the ability to put yourself in the top 10% of people who are reaching out takes so little effort. Sadly, the bar is really, really low in sales today. There's a lot of spray and pray, and there's just not enough real work going into it. And when you do the real work and you can demonstrate that and people see that, it works like at a way higher percentage.
Yeah, I was going to say that's depressing and motivating all at the same time, right? So
Totally.
Just this mediocrity is just everywhere, but it doesn't take that much to rise above all of that. So let's jump into some of the lessons that you've learned, because you're talking to some amazing people I'm assuming from a wide variety of industries, and what are some I don't know key lessons learned that you've learned over the last couple of years?
Yeah, the first I think is the most important thing is belief. And it's belief in probably 3 dimensions, right? It's believing in whatever it is that you're selling. Because if you don't believe it, nobody else is going to believe that, right? I think that's that gives sales a really negative connotation, right? If you're trying to sell somebody something that you don't even believe is going to help them. But it's belief in yourself and your own skill set, and belief in your process. And so if you can put those 3 things together, and believing that you can help somebody, then that really tends to break through. Beyond that, and beyond I'm going to say hard work is table stakes. I thought when I started the podcast, I would find some kind of tech wizard who had figured some sort of hack and was outperforming everybody and working 3 days a week. I kind of sort of found one guy who is borderline doing that. His name is Matt DuPont. But except for Matt, He's in order to do that, you have to work extraordinarily hard to figure out how to do it, right? So the hard work is just table stakes. There is no silver bullet. I mean, if there was, I'm sure I would have found it by now. But the secret is there is no secret, right? And people just don't like that answer. They don't like that you just have to work really hard at this. What I over time have really come to understand is each of these people, I mean, the way that they're successful is so broad. And I would say of those that I've interviewed, and I'm up to, I think I'm north of 180 at this point, it's pretty evenly split between introverts and extroverts. So it's not that. And what it really comes down to is they have found their way to be successful. So it's kind of like they have figured out what their superpower is and have just leaned into it super hard. And they do that thing that they do better than anybody else that likely comes very, very naturally to them. They've really developed that and honed that. And over time sort of built their system and their suit around that. And that's the way they're able to excel. It's not, unfortunately, I mean, there is no one size fits all. I mean, I've trained for triathlons and marathons over time, and I wish there was the training program, because I can pick up a triathlon plan, and in 12 weeks or 16 weeks, if I do everything it says to do every day, I'm gonna have a good race. That doesn't exist for sales. It's too nuanced. There's too many moving parts.
Dealing with the most complicated thing in the known universe, which is the human brain, but it's not just one human. It's multiple people in organizations and macroeconomic and microeconomic factors that are just influencing everything. So it's very fluid. But if you focus on the things that you can control, like your product belief, your belief in yourself and your belief in your process, and start to build from there. That's what I'm hearing. That sets you in motion for for success. And then you've got to do that hard work. So I want to kind of drill down on some of those for a second. So belief in your product. By the way, I'm totally with you. I wrote a book on selling, and I think it was chapter 2 was, it all starts with product knowledge and product belief. Because if you don't know the product, you can't feel that comfortable going out and selling it. You got to really kind of understand what it does, what the benefits are, and believe in it. So let's take that off to the side for a second. But when you talk about believing in yourself and believing in your process, you could say, yeah, I got to have the belief. But how do you get the belief? You can't just flip a switch and say, I believe. So what are some of the key steps to developing that belief in yourself and in the process?
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think it's reps. It's just repetition. It's doing the work. I mean, one of the things that personally took me a long time to evolve. Early in my sales career, I overthought everything. Like I had to have the perfect plan, the perfect approach, the perfect script, the perfect everything. And it took me years to realize the only way that you get to that level of perfection is you've tried it enough. It's like being a comedian.
Yeah,
you're not going to come up. Yeah, you're not going to have the perfect set of jokes be writing in your basement. You're going to get it from getting in front of audiences again and again and again and figuring out what works. How do I tweak this? How do I mess with the timing? How do I change this word? All of those little things. That's the same thing in sales. So it just comes down to the reps. You have to do this. And I talk with a lot of younger sellers about just they have to be patient. If you're going to get great at sales, there's no switch that's going to get flipped. Like it's a craft, right? And if you're going to master your craft, I mean, a master craftsman is not somebody that started their craft 6 months ago. It's not how it works. Right. And the way you get there is by just call after call, conversation after conversation, deal after deal. It's the only way.
I totally agree with you. And then if we move on to process, one of the things that I like about a process is it takes some of the guesswork out of selling, because if you don't really know what your first move is, your next move is, you can have some kind of anxiety about like, oh, I'm not sure what I should do. And I'll just kind of shoot from the hip and make stuff up. But if you develop a process, and then kind of practice that, get the reps in on each element of the process after time, you start getting better and figuring out what works. But why don't you talk a little bit about, because I mean, there's so many books out there on different types of processes, but what are some of the key kind of elements that any successful sales process should have?
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, I've asked this of every person that I've interviewed. I ask kind of what their guiding sales philosophy or kind of process is, and the most common answers I get are traditionally Challenger, Sandler, more recently kind of MEDDIC, which isn't exactly a process. I think here's the thing. You have to look at, I think you need to start with one of those things, right? Like begin with a fundamental sales approach that's going to have all of the pieces that you would expect, right? Is how do we create opportunities? How do we qualify them? How do we get in the door? What is the decision process, proposal? I mean, all the different kind of stages and things like that. On that core process, and I think you actually articulated this pretty well, it's focusing on each piece, right? Like, and whether it's a strength and you want to lean into that a little bit harder because it's going to give you an additional edge, or you need to shore up the challenging pieces. It's breaking it down and getting intentional. I mean, it's, if you go back to the 10,000 hours to become great or an expert at something, that's not just practice in general. It's like specific practice. So really doing the work on, hey, I need to do a better job of converting, an initial conversation to a real opportunity, or whatever that thing is. The other thing that I have seen when I ask this question is, again, I get these core systems that are referenced a lot, but what most will say is, yeah, it's influenced largely by this or that or this combination, but I've really just consumed a lot of information over time, and I've tried a lot of different things, and I found the pieces that fit me that I can incorporate into my process. So typically what I advise people is, again, start with an overarching process, or if you're in an organization that already has the process, that's the best place to start.
Right.
And then your job is to just hone and fine tune and work at it. The other analogy I use is music, right? You don't just start improvising, right?
Yeah.
You have to learn the music first. You have to learn it the way it was written, and then you can improve different sections and add your own kind of voice to it. Same dynamic, right?
Yeah, no, one of the best sales leaders I have ever had a chance to work with, I asked him, said, how long do I have to use this? It was an incredibly rigid, well-defined process, including a 30 to 40 minute kind of canned presentation. It was somewhat interactive, but it was very, very much, canned and scripted. And he's like, well, as soon as you have got this down, and you feel very comfortable and confident with it, and you can demonstrate that, then you can start to make it your own. And because when you make it your own, and then if you ever start to feel a little bit lost, you can always go back. You always have that foundation there. But first, you got to get this. That's the foundation. And I was like, all right. And it worked for me in that case. And I've used that many times when I've been training the teams that I'm working with. People sometimes push back, and I want to do it my way. That's fine. That's fine. Just learn it this way first, and then make it your own.
Well, let me take that one step further, right? So what I often advise people in that perspective is, and it very often early in the sales career, like this tends to be more SDR, like my job is to create opportunities and to get meetings type of a role, where it's like, well, I'm given this playbook and I don't like that playbook and I don't think it's going to work. Nearly everybody that I've interviewed, when they look at their quota, they set their target at 200% plus. The most common number is probably 200 to 300%. So here's the thing. If you're given a system that you're expected to run like that, what I tell them is do that for the expected number of repetitions, right? If you're expected to do 40 touches a day or whatever that metric is, do that. And then on top of that, ideally double it. And with that doubling, with that second half, do that your way. And now you can say to your leadership, hey, I'm doing everything you asked me to, and here's the results that I'm getting. And I've been experimenting with extra cycles. And here's how I'm doing that. And here's the results that I'm getting. And so you build through that. One, because of the volume of activity that you're doing, you ought to be ahead of your numbers or ahead of the expectations, right? And you've got real data to build your case on and go to your leadership and say, hey, here's what I've been doing. Here are the two things. I'm actually getting 50% better results my way. I'd like to do that all the time. Is that cool?
That makes sense. So you do your little A/B test, but make sure you take care of that A part first. Like whatever the company tells you to 100%. Do, you get that done. And let me ask you, what's the question or challenge that you get asked or face most often these days?
It's always the same. It's always time, right? Yeah. And it's the thing I get asked about the most too, which is, okay, Scott, how is it that you're carrying a $3.5 million quota and you're running 2 podcasts and an annual event, and actually 3 podcasts if you include my day job. I've got 2 kids, one now in college, so that burden has dropped a little bit. It's a lot, right? And for me, when I think about process, I think way beyond sales process. Sales process is a component of what I'm working on, but I think more broadly about my overarching productivity process, right? So how am I juggling not only my day job sales demands, but everything else in an efficient and effective way? And so this, for me, this is actually one of my superpowers, right? I have spent years finding my own system, and it's a matter of like understanding my own rhythms and what kind of routines work and what goes where, when, and a lot of study around habits and David Allen's getting things done and all of these things over the years, where I have built a system and a structure that works really well for me. And I think by and large, for all of us, it boils down to time. There's only so much time.
There's only so much time, and there's also only so much energy. And I want to come back to the energy, because the energy is important as well.
Yes.
But give us some hints, or give us some idea about how you manage your time. I mean, do you plan everything out on Sunday evening and write everything down for the week, or do you have everything planned down by the hour, by the day? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, it's a very agile kind of structure. So my day starts with essentially a giant triage. So I'm an inbox zero guy. So I clear my inboxes. I'm looking at my calendar. I'm looking at yesterday to kind of review and make sure that I've got follow-ups. I'm looking at today and tomorrow to understand what's coming up and am I fully prepped and have everything to go. And I'm also looking at that to understand today, how much white space do I have to work with, right? If I'm wall to wall and it's nothing but meetings, what I'm doing in that triage is figuring out what absolutely has to get done today that can't wait till tomorrow, and I'm going to figure out a way to get that done. And the other stuff probably not happening today. But on one of those days where, oh my gosh, I've got 2, 3, 4 hours of white space, how do I maximize that time? So it's pretty much a day by day process. I do kind of a larger weekly review process, but it all comes down to that daily structure. And ideally, what I'm doing is by spending that time and doing that triage and understanding how much time do I have to work within that given day, I'm able to just absolutely nail what my action list is. And so I don't have to think about anything else. Right? All I have to work through is that punch list and get down as far through it as I can. And it's ideally, this is always a struggle, making that realistic is an amazing thing, right? And if you can clear the list, I mean, that's a day to celebrate.
No, it feels great. And I think a big part of selling is, so many things are beyond our control.
Totally.
And that can lead to anxiety. It can lead to being demotivated because, you get too many 10 no's in a row and, you got to get up and go try again. That can be hard. So by taking a lot of the guesswork out of your day, by following a process, having a plan, getting that to-do list and prioritization down. For me, when I'm doing all that, you know what, I can get those no's and I can deal with it. But when I lose track of my plan and I forget to do some certain things, and all of a sudden that anxiety, I can start building up, right? So it's just like, okay, get on the plan again, get the list going. And as soon as I write stuff down, immediately I feel better. But, that takes a little discipline. Let me drop over to the energy side though, because you can have, all the time management, and you can optimize your time, but you also need to optimize your energy. You mentioned triathlons and marathons, and I guess that's part of it, but tell us a little bit about your regimen.
Yeah. So a life-changing article for me, I mean, this is probably 15, 20 years old at this point, but there was a Harvard Business Review article that talked about manage energy, not time. Mm-hmm. And so and I love that you called this out. It's so counterintuitive, right? If you wake up thinking, okay, I only have so much energy today, I'm like a battery, then why would I exercise? Why would I waste time on something like that when I can be doing something more productive? But the reality is that, like, taking care of your body and getting that workout in gives you more energy over the course of the rest of the day. So I'm a huge Peloton guy. I actually used to teach indoor cycling.
I'm no kidding.
And when Peloton came around, I was like, oh my gosh, this is everything I always wished I had in my classes, because it's so metrics oriented, right? It has all the numbers, and there's a stinking leaderboard. So I need to go win every workout. I actually, thank goodness they did this. They have a type of class called Power Zone, where it's basically individualized training. Because you do tests and it has you work out within certain ranges based on your own numbers. Thank God for those classes, because it keeps me sort of focused on the training and doing productive workouts that I need to do. Otherwise, I would just feel like I have to try and win every class, which I can't possibly do.
Well, the corollary for me, and I was looking at my phone because I was blanking on the name of the app, is Strava.
Absolutely.
The last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing a crazy amount of road cycling and mountain biking. I've taken the last 7 months off because I did a really long ride, and then I got tracked, and now I'm doing some other sports. But when I was doing Strava, one of the biggest challenges, I mean, I loved it. I come home and I check all the segments and everything like that. But I got to the point that I kind of got, PR addicted, King of the Hill addicted, and it's just kind of like, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm out here to have fun. Not everything on a bike is competition. But there's a segment coming up. I don't know if you're on Strava.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm not outdoors as much, and that's actually become part of the challenge of Austin, right? Like Austin was a great riding town. Now it's a scary riding town. There's just too much traffic, and so Peloton keeps me very safe. Nobody's going to run me over in my garage.
No, and that's a huge thing. And I mentioned that I've kind of throttled down on the cycling. Is the last ride I did, a buddy and I, we created our own fundraiser, and we rode. There's just the two of us. It wasn't part of a larger group, from Seattle to Portland. It's like our route was like close to 200 miles, and we did it in a day and a half. And there was a couple of close calls. In fact, my buddy crashed twice. One time right in front of me, so I crashed over him. It was wet. We hit some stuff, and but then there was stuff with trucks going by, and just I was like, I don't know if I'm being responsible doing this. It's like,
that's the conclusion I came to, and I'd love to get back to it, but right now I'm like, not right now.
And not to take too much of a morbid turn here, but there was the professional hockey player back east. I forget his name right now, but him and his brother were out. These are professional athletes, and so they're alert and aware, and bad things happen. So anyway, back to your regimen to stay energized. You spend a lot of time on the Peloton.
Yeah, so Peloton, I'm in the gym, doing weight training 2-3 times a week, and then recently I had a little bit of a health scare earlier this summer, that I was like, oh, okay, my cholesterol is not where I need to be, and so I've really gotten my diet dialed in of late, and it makes an amazing difference. I mean, it's just one of those things you don't think about enough, and it goes back to, you called out. Like what you're focusing on, controlling what you can control, right? Yeah. And what I realized was, because I hit a couple of plateaus, I'm trying to lose a little bit of weight, I'm trying to get my blood work better in control, and until you look at the numbers and start controlling that, so I had to, I've never tracked my calories in my life, but as soon as I did, oh my gosh, it's just absolutely eye-opening. And so when we think, let's put some of these themes together, right? Let's talk about the reps and controlling what you can control and the psychology around some of this. One of the amazing insights I got from a friend of mine who went through some very serious psychological issues to get where he got, a friend named Dave Schwartz. He thinks about, my life is a bullseye, right? And that very center, like the true bullseye, that's what I can absolutely control, right? Yep. And then that next ring outside, like, yeah, I probably have some decent influence over that, but I can't control it. And the further out you get from that bullseye, the less control you have. And so the recognition that it's about controlling the controllables, like what can you control? And I think, with a lot of sales in general, sales is kind of backwards in that we're given a quota. Well, the quota is an output. That's a result. There's only so much that you can control of what the outcome is going to be. What you can control is what the inputs are going to be. So I think we have to focus a lot more on what are the inputs, and the more sales is, I feel like it's a game of karma too, right? Like the more you do the right things, the more you get lucky, even though they might come completely out of left field. So if what you're looking at, I mean, one of the things I look at most closely is daily conversations. That's my most important metric, right? Because I can get there. I'm confident in my ability to get there. So I don't worry so much about how many calls am I doing or anything like that. But if I am consistently achieving my daily conversations, amazingly, everything else tends to fall into place. Right. So I think the more that you can think about what are the inputs that really matter. And if you're managing a team, like what am I coaching my team towards to helping them hit their inputs? And your psychology is a lot better too. Right. Like I don't feel like a loser because nobody picked up the phone today. Well, no, I did all of the activities. I still feel good. This is a win of a day. The law of averages will catch up with me in the next few days.
Totally agree with you, both on the previous point about energy and the importance of diet. I mean, for me, the diet thing is maybe diet and sleep and exercise. They're all there somewhere, but if I don't eat healthy, don't eat right, it affects everything. And it'll stay with me for a few days. But then on the importance of focus on things you can control. It's funny because when I've been managing teams, everybody has a target, and a lot of the best way, in my opinion, is to kind of collaboratively develop that target. What are you thinking? And here's what the company's hoping you're going to achieve. What resources will you need to get that? So on and so forth. But I always say, especially for people who are just newly joined, I really don't want you to focus on that big number, whatever it is there. I want you to focus on what do you need to do, as you were saying, every day to get it done. And if you're looking at that big number that you've got to hit 3 months, 6 months down the road, every day, especially in the beginning, it's going to feel overwhelming and it's going to be hard. But if you just focus on the smaller numbers that you need to achieve today, whether that's conversations, phone calls, email sent, whatever, and if you picked up the phone 25 times and did that, pat yourself on the back and say, good job. I did my job. Now go home and forget about it and then come back tomorrow and do it again. Right. And like you said, the harder you work, the luckier you get, and just, keep doing that. But, no, I think these are, I guess earlier I said there are some kind of, what's the word? Timeless principles in sales. And one of them is just doing that, doing the work.
Yeah. I'm chuckling here because I'm having this flashback. The quality of those reps matters though, right? Like if you're going to have X number of conversations a day or whatever your metric is, they have to be quality. There's this guy at the gym I go to. I call him, I go by myself. I'm kind of in my zone, so I don't interact with the other people. So my name for him, he's the machine humper. And this guy gets in there and he'll get on like the bench press and he'll load it up with a massive amount of weight. And then like literally hump the bar and move it 2 inches.
Yeah, just
like really
his
fast.
Elbow, locking his elbow in and out, Yeah.
But no, it's not even like the range of motion is probably 10 to 15% of what the range of motion should be. And he'll do, I don't know, like, I lifted 250 pounds 40 times. I'm like, you didn't do 1 rep. And so I think, the trap is only thinking about the quantity. right? The quality has to be there as well. And so you really need to be mindful of both of those things. Like, in order to win, did I hit that quantity metric, but did I do it with excellence? Like, did I do it well to my standard? And ideally, the highest standard you have is your own.
Right. No, totally agree. I forget what the term is called, but it's it's not just doing the 10,000 hours. It's the deliberate learning. There's something where you progressively go a little bit higher, whether it's in music, sports, or in sales. You do the task a little bit to a higher level, a little bit more difficult, but that's how you get better, right? Because if you kind of coast along, you're not going to make any progress. Let me ask you, you've met with all these top performers, you've talked with them, you've learned from them. What have you learned in terms of how to identify potential top performers and how to hire them and develop them?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I have any great ideas on how to identify them, because I talk to them after they've done it or while they're doing it. So I guess that's your best test. Here's what is interesting, though, as I think about that question. I have had a good number of people who have come up to me personally, and this usually happens, most often this has happened at our Sales Success Summit. But it's happened in other times. Somebody who is a big fan of the podcast will come up to me and say, Scott, I'm going to be on your show. I would say in 90% of those cases, they have made that come true. Wow. So I think what that tells me is the first thing you have to look for is real belief. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that you can be successful here? Right. And I don't know what the question is you ask for that, because I'm getting it in an unprompted fashion, where somebody is just like, you know what, come hell or high water. And it's like Babe Ruth, they're calling their shot. Like, I'm going to hit it over that left field wall. So that I think is a really, really key thing. I mean, beyond that, are they doing the work? Mm-hmm. Can you see that they're consistently putting in the reps? It's really as simple as that. But quality reps, like when I think about the quality versus quantity equation, I think in most cases quality wins out.
Makes a lot of sense. And again, you did say that earlier, that belief in your product or service, belief in your process, but probably underlying all that is belief in yourself. Because if you don't believe you can do it, why even try, right? So
exactly,
hugely important. I agree with you. I'm trying to think of questions or a process that would allow me to identify somebody's self-confidence or belief in their self. But something.
Well, I think another thing you can ask about, again, given that propensity to set personal targets that are 200 or 300%, I think you can ask an opening question around, talk to me about your goal setting process. Like, if I give you $1 million number for the year, what's your approach to achieving that? And so if you're listening for, if the first thing they say is, well, in the back of my head, I'm doubling it and working backwards to figure out what I need to do to get there, that's a recipe for somebody who, even in their own mind, might have failed their own process, or still doing 150% of your number.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Hey, earlier you mentioned that when you first got started in sales, that you'd probably spend a lot of time planning. I've coached or worked with salespeople. I actually had the opposite problem, where I would just kind of shoot for the hip and just let me go, and then go in and say stuff and make a really bad first impression because I didn't prepare or plan enough. But if you were coaching somebody that really wanted to spend all this time planning, even I've seen people would take a half a day to do planning before they'd even send an email. And I'm like, no, man, you've got to have like 25 emails out in that same period of time. You can't do this. So how would you kind of coach them or move them along because you want to have a balance. You don't want to go off like me, all half cocked, but you don't want to spend all day doing the quote unquote planning.
Yeah, I think balance is the right word, right? It's okay. If you're over 100% on planning, let's try and shift that to at least 50-50, right? Mm-hmm. So, in that example, it's like, let's think about this, but I need you to send one real email, right? Like, let's not try and make this perfect. It's important that we get the repetitions in. So do a little bit of work, do a little bit of prep, and then get that first email done, and then continue the iteration. I think it's it's helpful to constrain yourself in that way too. Like, especially if you are a researcher and a prepper, which I believe in. Like, I really do think there is value in spending that time to be able to send very relevant messages, but you've got to cap the effort. Right. I can't spend 5 hours trying to figure out, like, what is that button that I can push with Mark? I think it might be in Strava somewhere.
It is.
But I need to give myself like a 5-minute limit. Like, let me find what I can in that time frame. And the best thing that I find, that's what I'm going to use. Simple as that.
Some great advice there. You have the podcast, it's the Daily Success Story podcast. What, say it again. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So sales success stories and daily sales tips.
Daily sales tips. Okay. Share one of your more recent favorite tips that you've heard. I know that's a tough one to pick, but
oh man. Yeah. I mean, there's so many, and we cover so much ground. There's been, I mean, some of the things I've been talking about recently, I don't mean to make this so much about myself, but it's just what I'm remembering, because it's what I've been working on. I was talking a lot. Actually, here's what I'm going to do. So by the time this is out, this will be practice for me.
Okay.
So I'm gonna put in a rep right now. I'm actually going to turn this into a real tip. So I think the title of the tip is "Don't Lock Superman in the Phone Booth."
Okay.
And the idea here is, I see way too many sales leaders trying to manage by the numbers, right? And so what's happening is we're creating a numerical box that we're trying to put all of our reps into, okay? What Scott has discovered is that great sales professionals, they have superpowers. And a lot of times by putting them in that box, you're not allowing them to grow that superpower. So if you had a rep on your team who could fly, wouldn't you give them a freaking cape? Wouldn't you want to hone that ability, help them go faster, help them leap buildings in a single bound, all of this stuff? But instead, I think what often happens is we constrain them because we're trying to apply the same system and the same approach to everyone. And this is the hard part of leadership, is coaching and recognizing that each individual is different and each of them needs something unique, right? So giving them that cape is about really knowing them, right? Like really knowing their style, their approach, what works, what resonates, what's ideally received well by those that they're selling to, that you can hone. And a lot of times they'll have an idea what it is, but sometimes it's like the curse of knowledge. Sometimes their superpower is a thing that they do so effortlessly that they don't think of it as it being something that's special. So sometimes it's calling out those things, like, Mark, you are amazing in the way that you do X or Y or Z.
That's funny, because one of the best salespeople I know is really good at events. I mean, he's like the Jerry Maguire, just walks the floor and talks with everybody, and everybody, even the competitors, love him, right? But if the organization that he works with, most of their selling is not done in that context. But if I was running the organization, I'd be like, you know what? Don't put him in the booth. Send him, the phone booth. Send him to every single event that you participate in, because this guy, he's going to hit some home runs, and I've seen him do it.
I love that example, because what's a normal organization going to do? I'm going to handcuff him to his desk and say, "Hey, make a lot of phone calls." Like, I'm probably okay at that.
He's already been to 2 events, and we need to be fair, and so we need to send everybody. Right. I'm like, no. He's a pinch hitter, man. You're our designated hitter. You're going to put this guy in. So, but hey, so Scott, you talk to so many different people, but one of the things you also do is your Sales Success Summit. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit, because I think you've got one coming up in October, right?
October. It's coming up soon.
Talk a little bit about that. Who's it for? Who attends? And
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really an extension of the Sales Success Stories podcast, and it comes from my own guilt, because what I recognized early on is this show is amazing for me. because I get to know each of these people, right? Like I'm building relationship. There are conversations that happen beyond the interview. And Mark, as you know, the magic in podcast interviews happens before and after you press the record button. There's always especially when they finish, they're like, okay, here's the thing I couldn't say on the record. And it just gold drops out of their mouth, right? I wanted to share that. I wanted to not only share it with my audience, I wanted them to be able to lean on each other, because being number one is a really lonely place. Like, there is nobody in your organization that you can strive to be better than. And so I wanted to create that dynamic. So the only people we put on the stage are folks who've been on the podcast. So these are real sellers, educating other resellers, and 2-day event, all about the experience. I'm a total event snob. So I try and fix all of the things that I hate about traditional events, and I hate many things. And that has led to, we have this very special place. There's a movie theater chain that got its start in Austin, because we like to keep things weird, called the Alamo Drafthouse. And this is a full service movie theater. They were the very first ones that had this concept. So our event doesn't happen in a hotel conference room. It happens in a movie theater auditorium. So you've got a movie theater screen. You've got a very comfortable chair that, as of last year, now reclines, and a menu at your seat. And they will bring you whatever you want to eat or drink at any time over the course of the 2 days.
Wow.
But the real magic is it's a really intimate event. I try and keep it under about 150 people. For those that know the Dunbar number, that's why. And it's the first couple of years I had the event, it made me so nervous, because I had a huge misconception around what top sellers were. I thought there was just such a massive ego element. And what's the reality is, true top performers, there's a humility element way more than there is an ego element. And so what happened was, I thought, oh my gosh, this is really scary. I'm bringing a dozen top performers together, and if they get into this game of trying to one-up each other, this is going to be completely out of control. What instead happened was, they walked in and said, hey, I know I'm pretty great in my organization, but I'm not at all convinced that I'm the best person in this room. And they're students of the craft. So they gave their talk, and then they sat down and they took notes probably more furiously than the average or the typical attendee. And that has just continued. And now, I mean, there's a really nice core community group of people that have come for year after year after year. It's like a family reunion at this point. But just the level of supportiveness that's in that room, and it's different than, you know, if you've been with an organization for a long time and you always go to sales kickoff and you're a top performer, so you always go to President's Club, that dynamic's a little bit different because of the competition, right? These people aren't like, I'll do anything to help you win. This group is. There just is no, I have nothing to prove here. We're all there to get better, and so that environment is amazing. So it's really built for top individual contributors or aspiring individual contributors. Usually, about 80% of our audience is quota carriers, and then certainly we have their managers, their leaders, some startup founders, and others will be in the mix. But it's an absolute blast. And the question I ask at the end of it every year was this the best sales event you've ever attended? That's my bar.
That's a pretty bold question. Yeah, you got to feel confident to ask something like that.
Yeah, and last year, now I don't remember exactly what it was, but I mean, I continue to improve that result. It's a very high bar right now. I think we were 92% said it's the best sales event they've ever been to.
That's awesome, man. And I could figure out how am I going to get down there, man? This is awesome. Hey, well, Scott, last question. What one sales or performance or personal development book have you read the most or would highly recommend the audience to take a look at?
Yeah. Gosh, there's a lot. I'm gonna give you two.
Okay.
Two completely different directions. So if the habit thing resonated and the productivity topic resonated, James Clear, I went on an uber deep dive. I must have read 10 books on productivity and habits and all of this stuff. James Clear with Atomic Habits basically put it all into one book. So if you're going to read one book on the topic, he did a great job with it.
That book has changed. Saying something changes your life sounds pretty big, but it has changed my life in terms of it's definitely changed some of my habits and my ability to adopt new habits. I just follow some of his principles, and it's just like, oh, okay, it works. It was a great book.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one that I think has probably impacted me the most personally is Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership. That book is so good. Because at the end of the day, you own your success. It's not on anybody else. You can't blame your leader for not giving you everything you need. At the end of the day, you have to own it in its entirety.
Yeah, another great book. I think I've only gone through it once, but did the audiobook. But I remember the motivation and going to, amazing books. So thank you for that. Hey, thank you so much for being on the Grow Fast podcast. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way? LinkedIn or through your sales success media, or what would you prefer?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Or you can go to top1.fm and basically find everything from there. So top1.fm.
Awesome. Scott, thank you so much, and wish you a great remainder of the week.
Yeah, the short week. Thanks, Mark. Great to have you. Great to be here.
Cheers.